So just again to recap, my name's Claudia from the Radical Housing Network, and we're holding this event in relation to the People's Housing Charter, which you can find on the website. And we have invited several members to speak. So first of all, I'm going to ask TSIRESY Domingos to speak from the Stop the Hondo Tower campaigner, then Sean Berry from the GLA Green Party, Rose GRAYSTON from the New Economics Foundation, TAMIMA LERKINS from Women Asylum Seekers Housing, and Liam Norton from INSULATE Britain. And I'm really hoping this is going to be quite an exciting and lively discussion. We're going to ask our speakers to speak for between 5 to 8 minutes each, and then we'll open up the floor. And hopefully there'll be a bit of discussion afterwards, and those who want to stay on after the end of the event are welcome to speak more about concrete actions in any organising they'd like to do. So if I can first of all ask TSIRESY to speak, that would be great. TSIRESY, are you there?
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks.
Hello.
Hi. Yeah, I'm TSIRESY. I'm in the Fight the Tower campaign in Brixton. Yeah, so we're an anti-gentrification campaign group. So I'm going to run you through what we're doing at the moment and where my kind of personal involvement goes. And I think kind of the broad and general outline I'd like to give is kind of what pollutes also gentrifies and what gentrifies pollutes. When it comes to Fight the Tower itself, so we're in Brixton. Brixton is, I guess, if you're not necessarily familiar, you know, is the epicenter of Black Britain. It's where the Brixton riots took place. It's where Nelson Mandela came on a state visit. Such is the significance of the area to Black communities around the world. So, as is the case throughout the West, as the price of housing has increased in major cities, both private interests and also kind of middle class, I guess, communities have looked to more affordable kind of inner city neighborhoods to live in. Or to develop if you're a developer. And so that affects New York, Berlin, Los Angeles, Oakland, cities throughout the West. When it comes to our campaign itself, there's a private developer called Taylor McWilliams, who's American, and a developer and a DJ. He bought a few years ago quite a few businesses in Brixton Market, and kind of they're all independent shops, kind of traders, artists, etc. Effectively deciding to he decided to raise their rents by upwards of 300%, so 300 to 400%. And naturally, when you do that, you price people out of their premises, and so this is the person that we're talking about here, and he is now currently developing a site on Pope Road in Brixton, which sits right between two railway tracks. It's a 20-story office tower, concrete, steel and glazing, masonry cladding as well. There's too many issues with the building to kind of go over, so I kind of do that quickly. But so its mere construction means that there won't be an overground connection at Brixton. South London is known for its scarcity in terms of transport links, so that's a major issue. Another one is going to be its height, because because of the Brixton Conservation Area, the height of buildings is curtailed in Brixton to kind of preserve the area's Victorian centre. Another issue is because it's kind of double the height of everything else in Brixton, at least, is the daylight and sunlight, where all of the flats, many flats in the area would have their access to daylight restricted, which, as we're coming to find out, kind of it has kind of health consequences. It's also going to be a rooftop bar, so noise disturbances are quite likely. But kind of, I'm going to get to the two fundamental problems here. The first one is only 14% of the job benefits will go to Lambeth residents. That means that 86% will not. and therefore there's a risk, or the consequence, sorry, will be an influx of wealthier communities into the borough, and that kind of affects the housing market. Probably is going to increase rents and property prices within the area, because it's an office space, and people will look to move closer to their office space. And I think this is kind of the part where councils would say, yeah, well, but we need to kind of bring investment into the area, right? But that's also kind of a problematic notion, because gentrification isn't what it seems on paper, because gentrifiers bring their own businesses. They don't invest in the kind of in the areas that they gentrify. They just bring their own businesses with them, and that prices up local businesses. And so you kind of very much get that kind of separate but together notion, where people occupy the same neighborhoods but go to the very, very different businesses. And this is very apparent, sorry, if you just take a walk through Brixton and you see kind of disparity between kind of very kind of, I guess, white middle class businesses, restaurants, etc. And then right next door, you have a kind of much more diverse working class a business operating side by side, and you won't see the two interacting, very, very unfortunately. So there's real violence to gentrification. Another example would be the kind of increases in police presence, which have happened in Brixton, especially near Pop Brixton, which is this kind of gated, I guess, block of restaurants where quite a lot of kind of middle class young professionals go to. And its mere construction, after it was finished, after it started operating, police presence dramatically increased in the area. And that means more stop and search, that means more arrest, that means more kind of, there's more issues between the Black community and the police. So there is real violence to it. The same way you would see violence on regenerated housing estates, where councils operate in what's called managed decline. So they say, well, we're going to demolish your estates. Why would we fix it, right? You know, why would we kind of, so you'll get rat infestation, stamp mold, because the council's like, you know, I'm going to demolish this, so why would I care anymore? Yeah, so there is real violence to it on the kind of fundamentally humane side. And then you get the climate issue, right? Where the boroughs in London with the highest concentrations of nitrogen dioxide are Lambeth, Southwark, and Hackney, which is also the boroughs with the highest proportions of Black people in London. And then you also get the fact that, you know, the country south of the equator, which is the countries where obviously communities of color generally originate from, are the countries most affected by the climate crisis as well. So it's kind of, it's the very notion of kind of whether you identify as being from the global south or from here, as a first generation immigrant myself, you know, where, you know, both areas are affected by the climate crisis, both in terms of air quality and just, you know, carbon emissions. So for the HONDO Tower itself, in the London plan, there's a requirement for buildings to achieve kind of 35% carbon reduction. The HONDO Tower doesn't, for very, very simple things which have to do with the developer's desire to make money. So, so a good example is cold bridging, because there's so many columns in the building, external columns, they're not insulated, heat escapes through there. Also, there's an enormous amount of glazing, and as you all know, glazing is the highest source of heat loss in your home, as it will be in an office space. So again, you lose a lot of energy. You waste a lot of energy there. And also, finally, it's hot. Yeah. Sorry,
can I ask you to wrap up?
Yeah, sure, that's fine. Almost done.
Okay, thank you.
And the final thing is height, where buildings that are taller pollute more because it's colder at the top, so you need more energy for heating. Quickly, final point. Embodied carbon. Embodied carbon is so important. There was no whole life cycle assessment done for the building. That's really, really important, because say for this building, because there was no assessment, I did it myself, and so I found that the carbon emitted during construction is about 30 times what the energy savings are through the heat pump that the developers promised. So you kind of, it's massively lopsided as well, because the embodied carbon footprint comes first. It's what the construction, it finishes at construction. Most of it finishes at construction. And so then that's when you turn your lights on, then you get your solar panels and all your fancy kind of, I guess, energy savings. So embodied carbon is critical, and there was none done for this particular development. And so that's the kind of angle that we're bringing to Sadiq Khan with our hearing, which is going to be in November. So yeah, that was a quick whiz through. Yeah, do let me know if you've got any questions. I'm happy to answer.
Great, thanks, TSIRESY. I'd like, there's a few people writing things in the chat. That's great. That's a really good way to get discussion going. So please, if you think of something while people are talking, please do put it in the chat. We could maybe take just a couple of quick questions now and then have a wider discussion at the end once we've heard all of the speakers. So has anybody got a sort of quick direct question for TSIRESY?
Could I ask,
Kate, yeah.
Where do things stand with the Mayor of London? Because he had called in this application, but that simply means it's another level of examination. It doesn't quash the application, I understand it. Does Jerry know where we are with that?
So we were supposed to, I think Sadiq Khan had said that it would happen the hearing would happen in September, where he would kind of call both the council, the developer, and kind of any objectors and supporters, call them into the GLA to hear them out, I guess, and kind of make his own decision about that. That hasn't happened yet, so we're currently on. It's all a bit kind of stressful because we're all on standby and we don't know when the hearing is going to be, and so therefore we don't know how much time we have to prepare. So there's a lot of rushing going on at the moment. So yeah, I mean, we still don't know when it's going to be. We haven't got a date, and when we do, we're going to have to rush to produce all of these, all of this evidence and prepare our speeches. So I think we'll have about 20 minutes total as objectors to speak. And so kind of at the moment, we're lining up about 5 or 6 speakers to speak for 3 minutes to Sadiq Khan. And the developer will have a very similar amount of time as well. It's 50-50 allocations of time. Yeah, and we're quite hopeful for that.
Great, thank you. If we can park more questions till the end, that'd be great. I'm sure there will be some. There are some good questions already in the chat about supporting TSIRESY and the campaign, and I think that would be really nice to discuss at the end about some concrete next steps and how we can support people in their different campaigns. So, Sian, if I can ask you to speak now, that would be brilliant.
Fabulous. I'm Sian Berry. I'm from the London Assembly and I'm from the Green Party. I'm currently chair of the Housing Committee at the London Assembly. I sit on the Planning Committee, but the Planning Committee in the London Assembly doesn't make planning decisions. That's the Mayor. So as part of my job there, I have written to the Mayor asking him to call in the Hondo Tower, which he has now done, and asking him to refuse it. And I think the good news is, as the Mayor often says, that's his phrase, the good news is he has been turning things down lately. And I think the hearings within City Hall, like TSIRESY said, are much fairer. There's an even balance of pro and anti views, which is very different to a council planning committee. So whatever happens, it will get, I think, a fair hearing. Sorry, that's reminding me to come here, I think. So onto my talk, and I wanted to focus, a lot of my work has been around a lot of the calls within the charter, things like using empty homes, making sure that we get rent controls. These are all things that I have been working on as an Assembly member. I've managed to bring the current Mayor of London around to supporting rent controls. And we're next week, week after next. No, next week I'm going to be talking with the mayor about what sort of action he's been taking as well in Mayor's Question Time. But I wanted to focus on the greener homes, the retrofitting of homes, because that is something that in my capacity as chair of the Housing Committee, we've been looking at in the Assembly recently. Now, we haven't published our letters yet. They're going to go out in the next couple of days, and I wish we'd all arranged to get them published before this meeting. But we heard some really strong evidence from the Mayor's Green Homes team, from people working in this area, that there's basically everything is wrong with how we make homes greener, particularly how we focus on retrofitting homes. And we've got a set of recommendations that will come out asking for lots more investment and lots of different ways of reorganizing things to do things better. But I have to say, I mean, I've been a politician for 20 years now. It's basically 20 years and about 2 months since I joined the Green Party. And this has always been one of the things I've really wanted to focus on as a Green, because it's always seemed to me. Sorry, someone.
Sean, your sound is coming in and out a little bit.
Because someone isn't muted and they're there's it's like someone's got it in their bag or something.
Yeah, I'm going to mute them.
That's happened now. Great. Okay, sorry, I'll try again. So I've always wanted to focus on this issue because it's always seemed to me like the absolute low-hanging fruit of sorting out green issues, because houses stay still. You don't need to do complicated behavior change with houses and homes. They're all there. We can go out and fix them, and it can be done on any scale. It can be done in a community, it can be done on a street, it can be done at council level. And it seems to me like this is a problem we should have solved, but it's been absolutely years and years and years, and we've seen so many failures, to the extent that things that they've tried to do to fix it and tried to do it the wrong way have made the issue worse in lots of cases. And I said in one of my leaving statements, because I just stopped being the co-leader of the Green Party, I said, I'm full of beans still, and I am full of beans still, but I'm also full of frustration at this failure of policy, something which should have been so easy to sort out. So I'm just going to run through some of the failures now, and it's a bit depressing, so sorry. Zero carbon homes, for example. We set a standard a decade or so, more than a decade ago, that we should have zero carbon homes, and all the new homes being built by 2016 were supposed to be zero carbon. And the government, the Tory government, in 2015, one of the first things it did was go, no, we're not going to do that anymore. So we've missed out on 6 years now of having proper zero carbon homes being built. I've seen come and go 3 or 4 different schemes for helping homeowners and landlords of like individual properties to make their homes greener. And the last one was assessed by the National Audit Office as being set up to fail. The Green Homes Grant Scheme, set up to fail. It was so useless and so unable to actually do what should have been done, which is a mass insulation. We've seen a little bit more success with council homes and blocks run by social housing landlords. There have been some eco grants. Some things have got done. My own council, Camden, where I'm a councillor, has applied for more than its fair share of those grants, won them, and has insulated quite a few of its homes in ways that are not dodgy. But then, like I've just intimated, within that, we've got real problems that have been created by these schemes that are being run by councils as well. And this really, really worries me. Obviously, one of these is the use of flammable cladding. The other one is the way that so many of the schemes were installed so badly. And we have an endemic problem with the kinds of contractors who bid for these schemes. I mean, we all know about Ryden, who were the one I can probably name in all safety, because they did the Grenfell Tower. They also did the PFI scheme, which insulated the 5 towers in Camden, which had to be evacuated when they were condemned by the fire brigade. And this wasn't just about the use of cladding. This was about shoddy, like worse than shoddy workmanship being done in these towers. This is a problem. If we had all the money in the world, we would have to build up our own skilled public workforce to really do this, because I think the problems in that industry are so huge. There's also the enormous problem of what leaseholders and shared owners have to contribute, because leaseholders and shared owners, particularly of ex-council flats, are not wealthy people. They are people who cannot afford the entire bills, and all the government schemes seem to push all the bills right onto those people. These are failed schemes. They're not even set up right to get the job done. I'll get more onto that in a bit, but I also want to echo the comments about embodied carbon, because the other thing I've been fighting against all the time that I've been working in the London Assembly is the fact that demolition isn't the answer. That if a home is badly insulated, it needs refurbishment, not demolition and rebuild, because, as was said, if you do that, you're building up this enormous carbon bill in the building, and it takes you years and years of the carbon savings to pay that off. When we haven't got time to lose, we have to be refurbishing every single building that is capable of it. And I've been saying this for years and years and years, as with most things. Architects have really come behind this now. It's absolutely great. They're running a strong campaign, and one thing that can be done to just shift the dial significantly, not completely, in its favour of refurb rather than demolition is the change to VAT. So at the moment you pay VAT on refurbishment and you don't on new builds. That's ridiculous. So Greens, obviously I've been a Green politician all this time. We've had Greens working on this, and I think the best answer that I've seen in all the time that I've been working with Greens around the country is for years and years ago, and I'm trying to remember which year it was. It's something like 2004, when the councillors in Kirklees, which is around Huddersfield area, which is where my dad is from, so I'm very fond of those councillors, they run a scheme called Kirklees Warm Zone, and they managed to persuade the council to do essentially free retrofit of homes, free insulation, free installations of new heat pumps on the council homes, and also, just free everything that could be done. And it was done street by street in an incredibly efficient way, with a workforce that was employed by the council. These were good, skilled jobs for local people working for the council. And this was a relatively small scale scheme, but it made a real difference. If you go and look up Kirklees now, tens of thousands of homes have been done under this scheme, which other councils have not done. So I think it's just a great idea. It's the same principle as UBI. You're all going, what about the people who've got nicer houses? But actually, we want to get this done. We want to get this done in the most efficient way possible. And if you're going down a street doing this one, but not this one, because they don't qualify in this one, because it's not efficient. And I think we need something that's genuinely the Green New Deal we all feel like we want, something that really invests in every street, in every town, because it's good for the country, because it's good for our carbon emissions. So when I was putting forward our manifesto for the Greens in 2019, we were going to put £38 billion a year into schemes like this, focused, of course, on the people in most need, the areas with the highest levels of fuel poverty and all of that. But just let's not mess about. Let's just get it done, and we'll use taxation to get more money back from the people who don't really need the help. Let's just keep it simple and do it that way. And then finally, just to mention one thing that really did come up, and it's been a bit of my beef for a while, because I represent Highgate and Camden, which is mostly conservation area, and I've experienced resistance to, first of all, solar panels, but also ideas that we might refurbish streets that are mainly council street properties, because we have quite a lot of those. And the conservation area people complaining that we were thinking about putting insulation on the outside of some of these homes. It doesn't seem to me like that's right, but also it doesn't make sense to me that we wouldn't do all of those homes at once. You don't want one looking different to all the others. Let's do the whole street with insulation. That will then look decent, and we can get over those objections as well. So yeah, that's my pitch really. Let's just get on with this. Let's invest so much money, like eye-watering amounts, in this, because it's so worth doing, and let's just get on with it and do it fairly, and raise the money from general taxation, because that is the right way to do a big mission like this.
Great, thanks very much, Sian. If I can ask you, just in the interest of time, to make a note of any questions that you've got for Sian, and we'll come back to them at the end. Again, if you've got any comments, you know, that you're thinking about, please do put them in the chat, and then we'll come back to them to prompt the debate. Great. So if we now move on to Rose from the New Economics Foundation.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Rose GRAYSTON, and I lead the New Economics Foundation's housing programme, generating new ideas on how to deliver decent, secure, genuinely affordable homes for all without wrecking the planet. I also co-authored the recent report of the Create Streets Foundation's No Place Left Behind Commission with Toby Lloyd, which we are hopeful will get a hearing from government on some of the ideas in the People's Housing Charter, such as converting empty and rundown properties to social housing, turbocharging retrofitting through government funding and support, and policies to refurbish and repurpose existing buildings rather than demolishing them, including that really crucial VAT issue that Sian just talked about. The most important message I want to leave you with today is this: believe in these demands and in their power to win friends in unusual and unexpected places. We are clearly a long way from where we need to be on housing policy in this country, but almost everyone can now see this. Talk of a housing crisis is ubiquitous. The Conservative government now relies for votes on places where large majorities of people want the government to prioritise building more social housing and improving the homes we've already got. The economically illiterate idea that private developers will ever build so many homes that market prices fall to affordable levels has been put forward in the form of the Planning for the Future white paper and has gone down like a mug of cold sick in the Conservative Southern Heartlands. The Green Homes Grant, launched in 2020, was scrapped earlier this year, having allocated less than 2% of the funding earmarked for it, leaving a retrofitting policy vacuum that now needs to be filled. Those who are ready with clear, workable policy solutions capable of commanding significant public support have a massive advantage right now. And that is certainly the case with the People's Housing Charter. Never underestimate the willingness of powerful people in a fix to change their minds with the application of sufficient pressure. Grace asked me to talk a bit about other places that have made it further along the road to housing and climate justice. So I want to talk now about the place of which I am most jealous. And I prepared a few slides just because there's lots of information. Give me just a moment. I'm disabled from doing that. So I'll crack on. The Austrian capital city of Vienna has kept housing affordable for a century through ambitious social house building. In recent decades, it has developed an ultra-affordable model, an ultra-efficient model for doing this without capital grant. The city uses land already in its ownership or buys suitable land for development and retains control over the type and nature of that development. The city then solicits proposals from various private developers, which will build and retain ownership of the homes. A jury evaluates these proposals based on 4 criteria: architectural quality, environmental performance, social sustainability, and economic parameters, including proposed rent levels. In many projects, future tenants participate in the planning, design, and construction process and give input on what kind of facilities they'd like to have in the building. After the jury selects a developer, the city of Vienna then sells the land to the developer at an affordable price, a price that enables that plan to be enacted, together with affordable long-term finance. That finance often comes with central government guarantees to keep costs low, but crucially, it comes from a range of private and charitable sources. That means the money keeps flowing even in economic downturns, in marked contrast with the way we do things in the UK, where a change in the political or economic wind sees funding for social housing quickly evaporate. Private developers who collaborate with the city government to build affordable housing must allow the city to rent half of the new apartments to lower income residents. The developer then leases the remaining homes to moderate income residents, with around 90% of the city's residents eligible. So that's a really crucial difference as well. It's not a tightly rationed system. We've got a really broad access to the housing that's being built here. This model not only directly houses around half the city's population, it has also raised the bar on affordability, quality, and sustainability across the whole housing market. Because where people have ready access to high quality, low energy social housing, market housing then has to up its game to compete. Because of this and strong regulation, housing costs sit at around 25% of income across the city, in a capital city of Europe. It's pretty different to what we've got here in London. And the vast majority of buildings are connected to the city-operated district heating system or to alternative renewable sources. You've also got a really high proportion of buildings built to passive standards, which reduces the energy that needs to go into them. And a lot of public funding is made available to allow that to happen and to retrofit existing homes to reach that standard as well. There are many valuable lessons for the UK here, not least the importance of protecting and increasing the stock of land in public ownership. But there's one that's particularly interesting, which is the way that Vienna has focused social housing development on brownfield and infill sites, particularly around train, tube and tram stations. That's allowed the development of sustainable communities designed around public transport. It's prevented sprawl into greenfield sites around the city, and it's helped the policy to build conservative support from those attracted to the idea of brownfield social housing as an alternative to market housing in profitable countryside locations. Given the political failure of the government's proposed planning reforms because of fears they would lead to just this kind of market sale sprawl, I think there's a really exciting opportunity now to posit social housing on brownfield sites as an alternative, particularly given the support for that idea in a lot of red wall places. I do also want to mention those planning reforms in a little more detail, because while they're paused for the time being, they're not dead yet. And thus far, the political and media heat has been concentrated on the implications of the planning bill for countryside and suburban sprawl, while the government's proposals on social and affordable housing provision have received far less attention. But yet the devil in the detail of the Planning for the Future white paper is deeply concerning here, and I really want us to be ready for it, just in case it does come back. Many of you will be familiar with the viability system in the current planning system in England. If you're delivering a scheme, if delivering your scheme in accordance with the council's local plan will threaten a developer's ability to make a suitable return, which is defined in national rules as between 15 and 20%, they can break with local plan policies to improve the scheme's profitability. Viability squeezes a whole range of community benefits, as well as design and sustainability standards and the sizes of new homes, all of which are cost to the developer. However, overall affordable housing levels and the split between social housing and low-cost home ownership tenures as part of this are by far the most common casualty of viability arguments. Far from using the opportunity of reform to provide certainty around affordable housing policies and so ensure development goes further to meet the need for social homes, the government's planning white paper actually suggests building in this practice of flipping social and other affordable homes to market housing when housing schemes prove less profitable than expected, as a standard strategy for managing development risk. The white paper suggests, in the event of a market fall, we could allow local planning authorities to flip a proportion of units back to market units which the developer can sell. That would amount to the institutionalization of the viability system, with social and affordable housing bearing the risk of market volatility. The New Economics Foundation will be publishing new research on the potential risks for social and affordable housing provision from these proposals later in October, and that will show that in many local authorities, especially those in the north of England, there's a risk that social and affordable housing supply will be completely eliminated. So please look out for this and get ready to fight these proposals if the government does revive its planning bill. Finally, on a more positive and more urgent note, I want to talk to you about our upcoming work to put pressure on the government to properly fund and support retrofitting the country's old and leaky homes. On Wednesday morning, the New Economics Foundation will be launching our new campaign, calling on the government to use its budget this autumn to take action to upgrade 19 million homes by 2030. Not only is this essential for addressing the climate emergency and meeting the UK's net zero commitments, it's also crucial for addressing fuel poverty and ensuring everyone has access to a safe, comfortable, healthy home, as the current energy price crisis makes only too clear. Please do join the campaign on Wednesday at greathomesupgrade.org, and we'd be especially grateful if you could share the campaign with friends, family, colleagues and comrades during the PM speech on Wednesday afternoon.
Great, thanks, Rose. Apologies about your slides. We're just, someone else became host and then sort of trying to spread out the labour and things. Maybe there's a way we can share them.
There were only a few anyway. It was just sort of because there's a lot of talking in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe in the discussion, if there's anything key, you can share something. And the web link that you just quoted, if you can put that in the chat for people, that would be really helpful. Thank you. Yeah, and the link to yeah, great. And we'll put the slides on the RHN website as well. Brilliant. Okay, so again, if you've got questions, if you just make a note of them for the end, and if I can ask TAMIMA, TAMIMA LERKINS from Women Asylum Seekers Housing, to speak now, that would be great. Hi, Tamima.
Hi everyone. Yeah, so I work with Women Asylum Seeker Housing Project, which we work directly with the Home Office regarding the housing that they provide for the asylum seekers. So we normally do work on their behalf, and we speak and ask them to, you know, carry out the repairs, and if anything goes wrong, you know, we are the ones that we advocate everything towards them, and we are like the middleman in this situation. So this came in progress around 2005, 2006, and it came in force because asylum seekers were having really trouble accessing, you know, good housing, and their repair being carried out on time. And that really was frustrating everyone who was in the asylum system and the humanitarian, you know, rights. And so people didn't know their rights, and they thought that if they report and ask for better housing or for a repair, that it will, you know, come in and affect their cases, and that was not the case. So we introduced, you know, getting them to know, to get the knowledge and know their responsibilities and rights. And at first it was really hard to get people and to have that space whereby they were really comfortable and, you know, trusting us, and we had to build that gradually, and we got there. And that's when they started speaking out, and we were allowed to go to their homes and visit them and see their conditions. And it was really horrible and really bad. And these were people who, you know, have faced persecution, and, you know, they have flashbacks of everything that, you know, from the origin of their countries. And we supported them, and majority of them were having mental health issues, and that was because of, you know, at first they've been different housing providers, and the Home Office gives them like a long-term contract, which is like 10 years. And the last one that we were able to get them off was SACO, and that was because we did research, and that was for wrongful entry with the keys, and they would enter in their homes without, you know, letting them know when they're gonna come. And this was really triggering most of the service users, and people are getting really scared now, and they were not really feeling safe in their own homes because they were just, you know, entering with the keys any time of the day, be mornings, afternoon, evenings, and that could be any time from 7, 8 o'clock, and sometimes some people will be even sleeping. So we did carry out a research, and that was in 2019. And in response to SACO staff and contractors working for Home Office regularly, using copies of keys to enter homes of asylum seeker without notice, whether they were present or not. So that was really frustrating, even us, that we were working for them, because we didn't understand why they would do that, and we felt like that was not, you know, human rights, and it was violating their privacy. And majority were single parents, and, you know, adults who were single, women, and these are people who have come from, you know, very dark places, and it was really, yeah, it was really sad. And so we did the research, and we were able to, you know, win the case, and the contractors, the keys were taken away from them, and that was really, yeah, we were really happy to get that done. So at the moment, the struggle is still the same with the housing providers and the accommodations they do provide for asylum seekers, but, you know, we are happy now that, you know, in terms of repairs, they're being done on time. But regarding the housing which they give them, it's still, yeah, we're still having problem with that because they rent from private landlords, and the houses could be in a very bad condition. And yeah, and some people are even forced to stay in hotels sometimes, and even B&Bs, and it can be a duration of from 6 months to a year without them having, you know, a permanent home. So it's still a fight we are fighting, but a good one. But yeah, things are not really at the place where we want them to be. But yeah, but in terms of repairs, we are trying to push them, and you know, the Home Office now have introduced that, you know, they're really finding them a huge sum of amount if they don't carry out their repairs on time. So that's made them, you know, be really cautious about time scale and how they, you know, carry out the repairs in their homes. But yeah, it's still, we're still not having a great time with the contractors, which now it's MEAs. But yeah, yeah, so I would leave it there. Yeah, and thanks for everything.
Thanks so much, TAMIMA. And again, if you have any questions for TAMIMA, then please make a note of them or put them in the chat, and we'll come back to them later. Okay, so if I can now ask Liam Norton from Insulate Britain to talk, please. You've obviously been in the news quite a lot over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, thank you, Claudia. Thanks for inviting me to the webinar. It's lovely to be here. And thanks to everybody who's spoken. I actually did some bus stop ads for the Stop Hondo campaign back in it when it was the Save Nor, trying to stop the Save Nor being evicted. So it's nice to hear about that campaign and how it's carrying on. Yeah, and it's nice to hear all the other speakers. And yeah, so just a little bit about me. So a couple of years ago, I was an electrician on a building site, and I started to sort of look into the climate and what was going on. Got involved in Extinction Rebellion, and I've currently been involved in the Insulate Britain campaign. And I appreciate not everybody here may agree with that. But I'm just here to talk a little bit about why it was set up and to sort of make that argument. And so none of it makes sense for me unless we start to accept the reality of the situation that we find ourselves in. And it's important, ultimately Insulate Britain is a campaign designed to face the truth, face the reality. So what the reality that we currently define as is what Sir David King, the former chief scientific advisor to the British government, when he says that we have to move rapidly. What we do in the next 3 to 4 years will determine the future of humanity. Just like you to just take those words in and feel them. He goes on to say, he said this last week, unless we make the transitions necessary, we are going to lose what we understand by our civilization over the coming decades. So this is the reality of the situation that Insulate Britain is grappling with at the moment. The Chatham House report that came out last week, there's lots of things to pick out. One of the most things that stuck out to me was that at the current trajectory, we have less than 5% chance of staying below 2 degrees Celsius. Less than a 1% chance of staying under 1.5 degrees Celsius. So all the talk of trying to get under 1.5 degrees has been a lie. It's been a lie for the last 5 years. There's an article in The Conversation where scientists who were at the Paris conference said that none of the scientists believed that staying below 1.5 degrees was attainable. It's an absolute complete lie that everybody's been propping up for the last 6 years. And the Chatham House paper suggests that there's a 95% chance that we're going to go over 2. There's a peer-reviewed paper that was out earlier this year that suggests one of the consequences of 2 degrees is 1 billion people displaced. So there's a 95% chance of 1 billion people being displaced within the coming decades. The last fact, because I haven't got time, you all know about the climate crisis, so I'm not going to go into loads of stuff, but the last fact that was in that Chatham House report that jumped out to me, well, there was a few, but one of them I'll talk about, that if we do not reduce emissions and the current trajectory, by 2030, 10 million people a year will experience heat stress exceeding the survivability threshold. Well, what the survivability threshold is jargon for is that they're going to fry to death. So that's what's in the Chatham House report, which is one of the most respected organisations in the country, and they're making that prediction at the moment. And nobody is fully grappling with that reality. And Insulate Britain are currently trying to grapple, and we're grappling with the country's rage and at the moment, which is being directed us because nobody wants to accept that reality. So that's why, you know, I'm currently getting death threats and stuff for what I'm doing and continuing to do it, because I fully understand the morality about what it is that we're doing at this time in history. And just to talk a little bit about injustice, you know, there's lots of things, not just that I hear about that are going on that I think are morally justifiable to stand on the motorway. When I hear of some of the things that are going on in the global south at the moment, in Africa and the like, I think I get so angry that I want to go and sit on the motorway and stop how our society is being run, because I get so angry about it. I heard a report about a drought in Brazil that's going on at the moment in Sao Paulo, and a family in Sao Paulo, they've got no access to drinking water and they have to fill a water butt up, and after 3 days there's mosquitoes living in that water and they cannot access drinking water. This is 2021. We should be on the motorways about this. I get emotional thinking about it. We should be on the motorways, all of us. This is disgraceful what's going on at the moment in this world and in this country. We're talking about fuel poverty a lot in Insulate Britain. 4 million people in this country that have to make those decisions between whether they heat their home or eat a meal. 2.4 million children, or 2.4 million households. I think it's about 5 million children potentially that are living in fuel poverty. Disgraceful what's going on in this country. So this is all unjustifiable in our sense, and we need to start understanding that what's required of us at this point in history is no longer just about protest. It's about civil resistance. It's about actually getting out and disrupting and creating material disruption to power, because power only understands material cost. And that's why our tactics in Insulate Britain have been consistently criticised, is because they know they're the ones that work. And just to say that Insulate Britain wasn't heard of a few weeks ago, we've less than 120 people in 3 weeks have managed to create a national conversation. We've managed to, for less than £30,000, create a national, managed to create a national friction in terms of, you know, the Prime Minister, the Home Secretary, the Transport Secretary, that these are top level government ministers of our country that are having to deal with us at the moment. And why is that the case? It's because we're disrupting. That's the only game in town at this point in history. And that's with 120 people. Imagine what we could do with 1,000. Imagine what we could do with 10,000. And this is the biggest thing that they don't want you to know, is how much power you have. How much power we have as citizens. We've done it with less than 120 people, and we're still going into the 4th week. Groups of people that are so determined to act in terms of what's right and what's wrong. Less than 120 people are attempting to really make a difference. Sorry, I don't know how long I've been talking for. Sorry. Oh,
that's
it,
about,
my
if
8
you can
minutes.
start
Yeah.
to wrap up,
I'll
Liam,
wrap
that'd
up
be
now.
great.
Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you, Claudia. The last thing to say is that, yeah, just in terms of what we're asking for, as I really liked what Sian said, we had the same view that this was the low hanging fruit. We're not asking to take anything away from anybody. This is the absolute no brainer, and this is the demand in terms of it will cost hundreds of billions of pounds, and the 1.3 billion is about 0.1% of what's required. So they're not doing anywhere near enough, but the hundreds of billions that will be invested will actually probably pay for themselves. You'll get money back in the long term. This is an investment in our people, in our citizens, and in our country. That's what Insulate Britain is about, and it's about universal care, hundreds of thousands of jobs, and stopping fuel poverty and giving the best value for money for emissions. But thank you so much for listening to me tonight, and it's been really inspiring to hear all the other stories of what's going on in London. And I haven't had a chance to read the national document that you've created in terms of your new campaign, but I will look at it, and hopefully we'll be able to support each other in the future. But thanks a lot for listening to me.
Great, thanks so much, Liam. Okay, so we've got just over half an hour for questions and discussion. I can go through the chat, but before I do that, are there any direct questions to any of the speakers? To Sian or
Well, there was one to me asking about numbers.
Yeah.
Which I sort of have. I mean, there aren't brilliant estimates. Shall I just say what I know?
Mm-hmm. So just is that in the chat, Sian?
Saying how much is the total cost, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And
Oh
I
yes,
didn't say that. And obviously we've discussed what we would put in, but I think what we heard was that basically the government estimated that we need between 35 and 65 billion to bring up homes to like a standard, which is something like EPC 3 or something like that. That's not very high. We think to get London to carbon neutral properly will cost 61 billion. So it's hundreds of billions for the whole country. I mean, London needs a higher proportion because we've got a weird amount of Victorian homes, which are particularly hard to treat. But it is hundreds of billions that need to be spent across the whole country. And it does need to be spent in the next 10 years at the very, very longest. Like, you really want, the more you get done now, it's all through the area under the curve, the carbon budgets. The more you do now, the less you have to do later on other things. So it's just better to get on with this. And we could do this, it's like it takes a wartime effort, but there's no reason why we couldn't really just get on with retrofitting our homes as the first thing, and then really press on with the other stuff as well.
Great, thanks, Sian. So there are lots of comments. There's a question directly to TSIRESY about supporting his campaign. TSIRESY, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't find the mute button.
Support your campaign.
I think there's a couple of things. Definitely follow us on social media. We're at Fight the Tower if you search us up. I also think it could be good actually to submit an objection to the GLA. I'll put the link in the chat and you can submit an objection. That's good, and obviously kind of spread the word around. I'm happy. Something that is good is that there's kind of more and more public opinions increasingly aware of the issues surrounding embodied carbon and issues surrounding gentrification. There's a really good report by the Runnymede Foundation mapping out gentrification in London. And so I'll put that in the chat as well. So yeah, just spread the word, and yeah, that would be incredibly helpful.
Great, thanks, TSIRESY. Joanne from Action for Fire Safety Justice, did you want to ask your question on the video? Might be great to get your thoughts as well on some of these issues.
Yeah, so the question that I asked Sian in the chat was, obviously you mentioned that the mayor was reconsidering some planning permissions, etc. Obviously one of the quite important issues that a lot of people are struggling with is there are multiple developers with obviously multiple buildings which require fire safety remediation. Whether that's correct or not is a different story, but basically leaseholders, as you mentioned, leaseholders and shared ownership tenants have to pay those costs because the developers are not funding them. And a lot of people are suggesting that the councils should be withholding planning permissions to such developers until such time that the buildings in their boroughs are, are guaranteed to be paid for by the developer. Is there any chance that the mayor would consider withholding planning permissions to such developers? Because normally the response from the council, and any council that I've heard of, is we can't withhold the planning permission just because we don't like the developer. If the permission is sound, we have to approve it. But obviously those permissions had been granted in the past, and it subsequently turned out that these buildings, it's not just that they've been built with flammable materials, it's that they were actually contrary to the building regulations back then.
Sian, do you want to come back on that?
Shall I answer that? So you're basically suggesting that councils take direct action against those developers on unrelated planning applications just to try and force their hand in terms of the other ones. Yeah, that's very radical. And you'll find no council will agree to that, because these people have deep lawyer pockets. They will sue the heck out of the council. So I cannot see a council's legal department going, no, this is not safe, because they'd face legal costs to fight that. You know what I mean? I think they're better off suing the councils the other way around, if you see what I mean. That's what we're doing in Camden. So the towers I mentioned, they were really, but we paid a fortune for them to be redone, refitted, and they were done dangerously. They created a massive health hazard, and we had to pay as a council, we've paid up front, and we got some money back from the government, but we had to basically pay up front for the works. So yeah, there's legal action going on there, and I just think it is not fair that leaseholders and shared owners have to cover any of the costs of this. And this is the same thing as with the insulation. It's someone asked in the chat, shouldn't it be just a low cost loan for people who own their homes? Well, I mean, you could argue that, but actually there are a lot of people out there who have assets but no income. It all just adds complication and inefficiency to what ought to be a really simple scheme. And the same applies to the cladding issues as well. Just, if there's a future way of reclaiming it from people or making you ineligible for some future scheme, whatever, but don't make you pay now to do this when you had no inkling that this was going to be a cost that you were going to face.
Yeah. So sorry, just to clarify, my question to you was prompted by what you mentioned, I think, with regards to sort of an energy efficiency. You mentioned that the mayor is reconsidering is starting to withhold planning permissions for other reasons, which obviously then made me think, is there a leeway? Because Tom Copley and Sadiq Khan, they keep going around saying, leaseholders should not pay, blah, blah, blah. But we need action. We need action. Like, I don't know if the others on this call have heard, there was actually the first suicide reported on brought on by the building safety crisis over the weekend. And, you know, while obviously this is very tragic, I feel like this is probably not the only case. It's just the only case that we know about. And this cannot go on, you know. And yeah, so that's why, you know, I'm looking for, everyone is looking for leeway or for inroads into doing something, so we don't have to pay for the mistakes of others. That's it.
Thanks, Joanne. Just on that issue, on issues around fire safety, there is another question about flammable cladding and whether there are other options, whether people know of any other options. So I don't know if Sian, you've got something to say on that, or somebody else. Just to say briefly, Peter, I know that you've got your hand up, and I'll come to you in a minute.
Yeah, very briefly. I mean, no, but I do know that other tower blocks in Camden have been clad, for example, in insulation and then with just render on the outside. And I think it's just the rain screen cladding where there was a massive amount of scrimping that went on. And it's just a case of doing the job properly. There definitely are alternatives, though. Yeah.
Thanks. Peter, I know you've had your hand up for a bit.
Thank you so much, Liam. Thank you very much. I was not aware of the scandalous rip-off this government have been doing. The promise in the manifesto was 9.2 million, which, as you say, is a fraction of what's needed. They haven't spent that money. Do you think it's fair that they've taken that money, which was promised to keep poor families warm, and they've taken that money and they've given it to the motorways and the road building? 27 billion has been taken from home, keeping warm's home, and been given to the motorways. Well, number one, do you think that's fair? And how can you get whether ask the sunraiser to realise that it's not fair to take their money from keeping their homes warm and giving it to the road builder bosses? It doesn't go to the workers, it goes to the mafia gangsters that actually run road construction in this country.
Thanks, Peter. No, I don't think it's fair. I think it's business as usual. And how to make the sun reader start to agree? Well, that's a tricky question. And I suppose at the moment, people would argue we're not doing the best job of that. But I think I think what's going on here, and this is like where I get more convinced that what in terms of the justification for public disruption is it's like there's an analogy of it's radical love almost. It's because the fact is that the carbon way of life that we've experienced over the last however many years has produced lots of benefits for people in this country, and it's like a blanket to people. And to start to suggest that some of those things may need to be taken from them, people react with anger to that, and we understand it. It's like we're in this addiction, aren't we, to it? And but I do think that life could be better. It's like the alcoholic who thinks that they need the alcohol, and then when they give it up, life could be better. And I do think that's the case with lots of things in terms of how we exist. But I do, unfortunately, my belief is that it is through public disruption, and that obviously at the moment we're public enemy number one, but that will subside at some point, and then it leaves space for people to start to see to start to have conversations, and they won't necessarily involve Insulate Britain. I mean, like I was listening to LBC the other day, and they've got no shame really. They've had us on for 3 weeks, and then the adverts, they're trying to sell insulation in the same way that, like, after the XR April rebellions, they're trying to sell electric cars. So you know, this conversation will happen, but unfortunately, what we need to start seeing is that, you know, I don't know, there potentially needs to be another way, but I do think it's through public disruption, and I do think it's justifiable in terms of the emergency that I spoke of earlier and how much danger their families are in that they're unaware of. So the disruption, I see it as kind of like a radical love, and that's how people that are sitting in the road are putting up with all the anger and the hatred, because deep in their hearts they do love these people, and they're trying to sort of think like, look, this is the way that the government will potentially start to change things.
Thanks, Liam. Can I come back? I was shocked at the way Good Morning Britain focused on hypothetical. But I think the way you were just speaking now really gets through. But that if we think of one person who's died because they were too cold, and have some identification with that one person, and then you say it's 8,500 and it's 4 million at risk, and it's a direct result of dismantling policies that were in place. So in a sense, deliberate and willful homicide. I think that might break through if you can snap that point in and just focus on the individual. There's the National Energy Action Charity who's been talking a lot in front of the House of, the Base Select Committee. They clearly know a lot of individuals who have lost their family because of insulation. They require consent forms if you will be looking for a champion to say, my mum died because of this government policy from freezing to death. But I wonder, have you researched alliances with the charities who have been working for 40 years with the victims of this incompetence from government in insulating homes?
Yeah, thanks, Pete. I think it's a great point actually in terms of sort of offering up. I think our strategy, to be honest with you, is to soak. We accept the anger and stuff that people want to throw our way. It's part of the deal. So we don't want to come across as trying to justify it. We accept these things are unacceptable. We accept that, and it's like, unfortunately, there's this other thing that change won't come with purity. That's the other truth. That the state of reality, the state of things at the moment means that change will be messy, and it will be uncomfortable, and that includes it will be uncomfortable for the people that are in the center of it, like the people sitting in the road at the moment. It isn't pure. It's got uncomfortable things that will go along with it, and I think our strategy has been to soak it up and just accept it and agree with it as being unacceptable, whilst then saying it's also unacceptable that millions of children are living in fuel poverty. But I think you're right that people connect to stories. They don't connect to facts, figures and stats. They connect to stories. So I think that's you're onto something in terms of that being what will connect with people.
Thanks, Liam, and thanks, Peter. There's a question from Peter Somerville about heating systems, heat pumps and hydrogen. Peter, did you want to ask that directly? And I can see, Pete, that Elliot, you've got your hand up as well. I'll come to you in a minute.
Okay, yeah. Yes, I think the consensus opinion is that heat pumps are the way forward, but there are quite a lot of problems with heat pumps at the moment. We're just getting them installed properly, and then the costs of installing them and how they run. So we're really sort of in the, although this problem has been going on for decades, actually, and still doesn't seem to get the proper attention it needs to make sure that actually there are proper systems for installing heat pumps at low cost and so on. And because we've never really got a grip on it, suddenly we've got this hydrogen lobby, because they've seen that the gas companies and so on are trying to extend their lives, and they see a way of providing hydrogen times, even though there's all sorts of problems with hydrogen. One is, of course, that it's not actually clean fuel anyway. It could be green hydrogen, but they haven't got any green hydrogen, so it's kind of pie in the sky for at least the next 10-20 years. So really the emphasis should be on heat pumps, but I just wondered, you know, for what people had to say, kind of in practical terms, about how you advance that agenda in the UK.
Thanks, Peter. I don't know if any of the speakers here have something to say. Rose, we've also got people here from architect climate action. So maybe Rose, if you want to say something, and then we'll see if they've got anything to add.
Yeah, so where we are right now with heat pumps is roughly where solar and wind technologies were 10-15 years ago, is my understanding. We've got the technology, it can be done, but we don't yet have the manufacturing scaled up, and the unit cost is too high for people to be incentivized to do it. Basically, we're going to need a certain amount of secure demand behind heat pumps to tackle that problem, to build up the supply chains, the skills, the materials, to get all of this stuff in place so that it can be rolled out as a genuinely cost-effective solution, because at the moment it's not. This is the beauty of starting with social housing, because we've got relatively unified ownership. If we leave right to buy to one side for a moment, we've got some serious scale. We've got the ability to implement different solutions, more ambitious solutions, to a lot of homes in a concentrated way, all at one go, and provide a certain amount of stable demand that we can use to underpin these new technologies. Someone's got to go first with this stuff. It's in everybody's collective interest that it happens, but in almost nobody's individual interest. With social housing, because it's publicly owned, you know, you don't have the same kind of problems around financial incentives that we've been talking about in the chat here, where if we were to use taxpayer money to subsidise heat pumps in homeowners' homes, potentially those homeowners might be able to sell their homes on and make a profit off of that technology. There's a sort of a risk of that happening. That risk just doesn't exist in social housing. So social housing is perfect for this stuff. This argument has been noted by all kinds of unlikely people, including the CBI, CPRE, all sorts of unlikely allies in this. Lots of business groups are really strongly in favour of the idea of prioritising social housing. That's why I think the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund is such a great goal for us all to get behind. It's really brilliant to see this prioritised in Insulate Britain's campaigning. Really encourage everybody to sign up to the petition that's been shared in the chat as well. This makes a lot of sense. The fact that you also have a lot of people living in poverty in social housing by its very nature makes it, you know, also a great thing that we can use to tackle income inequality and poverty, particularly as we see all the energy price crisis happening at the moment. But that's, I think, a really important thing about heat pumps. We can bring these costs down, but we need a certain amount of scale to do it. Private housing, whether owner occupied or in the private renter sector, isn't going to provide it. Social housing can. Social landlords are happy to do it, but they're not going to cough up, because there's nothing in it for them. They don't, you know, the immediate benefits of insulating homes, of installing heat pumps, are lower energy costs for tenants and more comfortable homes. So there's no gain for social landlords in doing it, but they will do it if government pays. It's great to see that we've got some of the right priorities and that we all seem to be pretty aligned on that.
Great, thanks, Rose. And I think I've got Susie from Architectural Climate Action. Susie, do you want to?
I just wanted to come back quickly on the heat pump issue. That I think the technology is fairly sound, actually. I mean, the costs will come down as with more investment as the supply chain grows. The big problem with heat pumps is that if you don't insulate, they cost more. Than gas, but as we know, gas prices are going up, and we've got to move away from gas. But it isn't just a question of cost. I mean, obviously, fuel poverty is a really important issue, and we don't want to make people's bills bigger. That would be a disaster. But so insulation is key. You can't solve the problem with just heat pumps. It has to be a whole house strategy, or whole building strategy to retrofit. I think that's really crucial. There's also, I mean, there are kind of important issues. I mean, fires come up as an important issue, fire safety, but also you have to think about moisture movement really carefully, because when you insulate, it changes the the way moisture moves in the buildings, and that can cause problems of dampness. So skill is really important. So I think you have to have a kind of a holistic strategy. That's what's really crucial to retrofit.
Thanks, Susie. That's really helpful. That was, I was also thinking about a question myself, and people at the beginning of the meeting were talking about issues around health and insulation. So I know it's quite a contentious issue. So thanks for that.
Well,
Sean,
I think
did
a holistic approach is what's important, and I think that it's really important to resist the push to hydrogen, because it isn't clean. Hydrogen, producing hydrogen creates greenhouse gas emissions. The other point is about insulation is if you just went for electric heating, you'd make too many demands on the grid. The grid doesn't have the potential, even with lots more wind power, lots more solar power. We have to think about the capacity of the grid, the national grid, the electricity grid. So it's really, insulation has to be a really key part of the strategy.
Thanks, Susie. That's great. Sean, did you want to add to that? And then I'll come on to Pete.
No, only eventually. I can wait my turn. It's fine.
Okay. Pete, you have a question.
Yeah, thank you. I really want to thank all the speakers. It's been just brilliant. The range of topics that we've covered. We could just pick apart all of them. But I really wanted to thank Liam for what he's doing, because it has opened the door to have those conversations about retrofitting. I've been banging on about retrofitting and embodied carbon in Lambeth Council for the last 3.5 years since I became a councillor. But now we're talking, thanks to the work Sean's done on embodied carbon and everything at the mayor's, but now we're talking about retrofitting, and I've got senior officers at Lambeth now finally talking about retrofitting and actually taking action. So I wasn't really got a question, but I mean, what I did want to point out was that what we do need to do is educate people, and it's about, and I want to put a question out there really generally more about, how do we educate people? It's taken a lot of effort for me to speak to senior officers at Lambeth to educate them about what's going on. I think they've got it now, and I think they're getting it, but and they're seeing that there's stuff that needs to be done, but we've got to keep having those conversations over and over again, and I think it is the sort of actions that Liam's doing. But what else can we do as a group? I mean, amazing people on this call, but what else can we do to really get the education out there to everyone?
Do any of the speakers want to come back on any of Pete's points? No? Great, thanks, Pete. And I've got Bill. Bill's been waiting for a little while, and then I'll come on to you, Sean.
Yeah, I sent Liam a thing which I meant to say to everybody, but he answered it anyway. But one of my cousins, who's not at all progressive in any shape or form, and we had an argument about Insulate Bristol the other day, and she said, I agree with what their demands is. And I think that's the thing, is people can criticise the action, but it's put a demand where it wasn't before. Everybody's talking about insulation. People are talking about how long did the IPC report last in the news? 2 or 3 days, and then the sort of red warning for humanity was off the news again, and cakes was back on the news. And I think the thing that the shift that we've had to take now is we've done housing, and we've been fighting for people's homes and fighting against the state demolitions, is everything now is superseded by the threat of the climate crisis. Do you know what I mean? Everything has to be argued in relation to that. So the destruction of communities is now the potential destruction of humanity. But we have, and I actually think the Insulate Britain campaign is brilliant, because it's thought out. What is, it can have a 10 to 15% reduction of CO2 emissions by insulating. It's a massive impact on CO2 emissions in this country. It deals with fuel poverty. It deals with just transition, and actually puts the politicians on a concrete spot. You've declared climate emergencies. What are you doing? And I think the people who are sticking themselves to roads are blooming heroes, to be frank. Now, there might be better ways of doing it, but people need to come up with better tactics, because I actually think the most important thing is that actions make changes. And to Pete's point, I think, is that if people can't stick themselves in roads, and some of us can't for jobs or whatever, but our movement, the housing movement, has to get behind the demand, and we have to explain why it's so important, and we have to use every network we got to be supportive of people taking the action and supportive of the demand to insulate Britain, and getting people like Liam in to speak to as many people meetings as possible, and the rest of it. And so, yeah, and the speakers here, I just want to echo what Pete said. I thought they were brilliant. Even the question of like refugees and housing. Refugees have been othered. Do you know what I mean? It's like the worst housing is put aside for immigrants and refugees. They have less rights. You know, people with no recourse to public funds should be grateful of whatever they get. The question of refugees is more starkly going to be not about others, but I think our leaders would have us build walls, and we need to be building bridges and say this is all our problem. The question of where people live safely is going to be critical, and it's not for our children anymore. It's going to be happening in our lifetime. And so that notion that we have finite resources, a finite planet, and we need to look after it and look after people, and that means providing homes for people, is central now. And so the networks, I'm really appreciative of all the people who joined us, because I think it's really useful, but obviously we need to take it into action as well. And so, yeah, I'll shut up now.
Thanks a lot, Bill. Just to remind people, we've got about 5 minutes left. So I've got Sian and TSIRESY, and then I want to move to action on empty homes, because there's an action on Saturday to talk about. And a couple of other questions, and then we'll close the formal session, and people who want to hang around and talk about actions and organising are welcome to. So Sian.
Right, yeah, so I'll do really quick rounding up of 3 things, if that's all right. I think Rose answered one of the questions, one of the points in the chat that I was going to bring up, which is, yeah, there's completely an argument for buying up more of these homes that have been sold through right to buy, and there is, thank goodness, money now coming from the Mayor of London, leftover money from the money that's been used to subsidise new home building, that's being used to buy back these homes. This will simplify things across social housing. I wanted to also just make the point, though, that yes, the best things to start with are social housing. But let's remember what Liam was saying. We only have 10 years at the most, 3 to 4 years to do the bulk of this work. And that means we can't leave out trying to find ways to do all the private housing, and importantly, all the private rented housing, because landlords are the least motivated people to deal with this out of everybody. Private landlords have got some measures now that are in the law, but they're limited to, I think, £5,000 of spending, and that isn't going to do what we need to most of our homes. So we've got to try and start doing things for the private homeowners and not just talk about social housing, because it will be too late for the actual climate chaos that we're trying to avoid. And then finally, just to say, the question of like energy we save is more valuable than green energy we generate. And this is really hard to get across to people from other parties. There's a guy from America whose name I've forgotten, which is ridiculous. Bill something, I'm terrible with men's names. He talks about the concept of negawatts, which are, watts you don't need to generate, basically, because you've saved them. And these have genuine value. There isn't just the health benefits of things like reducing fuel poverty, improving the people's state of homes, the mental health benefits of that, the social equality benefits of that, because the poorest people always end up in the worst homes. But there is genuinely the saving you need to make against building some of this big green energy infrastructure, things like dams and tidal barrages. They're not carbon free either, actually. You have to put a lot of concrete into those. And so the more we can save, the better. And this is why this is the low hanging fruit. Absolutely.
Thanks, Sian. TSIRESY.
Yeah, thanks, Claudia. I was just going to say, I just had a couple of thoughts about Pete's point earlier, which is, I think these issues have to be made as personal as possible. And I think, Pete, you're great on kind of, for example, like highlighting the human cost of estate regeneration, for example, highlighting how many people it can kill, how many people it can really, really affect in terms of mental health, physical health, etc. So I think making sure people realize that this affects their personal lives, and there's no way they can avoid it. whatsoever, yeah, so yeah, just a quick thought on that. Oh yeah, and also I was going to say, I think it's also important to involve designers and scientists in these conversations as well, kind of encourage them, if you know any, encourage them to speak out, because I think we can be quite isolated from we can be quite apolitical and be kind of very reluctant to express our own opinion or get involved in kind of influencing public opinion. And I think the more designers are involved, then the more a public opinion can be moved on these sorts of topics.
Great, thanks, TSIRESY. Sanaka, have you got a question or a comment? I know you've had your hand up for a little while.
Yeah, this is to Liam. Now, yeah, fine. The campaigns on the motorways have worked. They've kind of been on the front page, been on not GM, was it? Good Morning Britain. I was wondering, like, in terms of like other campaigns, would it be actually interesting to retrofit, actually put insulation on a building as a campaign, almost like going like Nick Knowles' big build or whatever program he has, where loads of people come together and do the whole thing almost overnight, so that you have like the the pundits who come on all these like daytime shows and just say how bad Insulate Britain are. They're all kind of eco-fascists and all sorts of terms like that. But then you actually show this is like a takeover. This is how you insulate buildings. Fine, the road gets blocked over, but each time someone comes up, what the hell are you doing? Are you going to block the road? Or you just give them a flyer, come and have a look, see how we're doing or what we're doing. And then suddenly that together with the other stuff, then it's kind of a bit more accumulative is not the right word, but you can kind of like it's building by building and you're showing how it can actually be done.
Thanks, Sanaka. Sorry to cut you off, but
sorry,
we're rapidly running out of time now. Liam, have you got a brief response?
Yeah, it's nice to see you again, Sanaka. We met once before. Yeah, like insulation, I'm not an insulation expert. So the way that we designed this campaign was using work that's already been done by the National Retrofit Strategy, the National the Construction Leadership Council. We basically used work that had already been done and tried to sped it up. Unfortunately, the truth is that in terms of where we're at, insulation is the first step. And unless what the situation and the reality that I talked about means that this needs to be moved on, and what we need to do is drive people into starting to understand, and what I talked about in terms of power, understanding our power. What we really need to do is force through change in every single part of UK society and the economy in order to decarbonize every single sector of it. And that's the mission for campaigners over the next 3 to 4 years.
Thanks, Liam. Okay, so there's just one last thing that I would like to just advertise, which is an action on Saturday by Action on Empty Homes. Does someone want to just briefly flag that up before we say goodbye? It's in the chat.
Claude,
So,
just to say that I don't know if Chris is here from Action on Empty Homes.
Yeah, I'm here.
But just to say, we're doing Radical Housing Network is supporting. So there's various actions happening in different parts of the country. But Radical Housing Network in London is supporting an action in Westminster. I think Terry was going to come and talk, but she's not here. But basically, there's a tower there, Millbank Tower, which is empty. Basically, it's being refurbished. There is a plan to to repurpose it, but it's going to be purely for luxury flats and 5-star hotel. There is not one single affordable house going to be in that block. So it's an example of where we could be repurposing an office block for affordable social housing, and they're not doing it at all. So the idea is to have a protest outside of that to highlight that wasted opportunity, and it's going to be live streaming to the Action on Empty Homes National Rally. So it's at 11 o'clock on Saturday at Millbank Tower, which is in Millbank in central London. So, but yeah, Chris might want to explain the whole day of action.
Well, I mean, only to say really that if people know of examples of local buildings that are either being left empty, often a feature of developers, that they'll leave a building empty so that there'll be less opposition to them actually refurbishing it in a way that's profoundly antisocial, or using it or turning it into luxury flats. Often part of the game is to allow the building to run into dereliction first, or equally developments where there has been no social housing developments of, we've all seen lots of towers of luxury flats that we know will be turned largely into Airbnbs, and this sort of development. So yeah, I mean, we are trying to encourage people to draw attention to local antisocial developments in their area, if you like, or wasted empty homes, and the opportunity that these could represent. Because if you're going to start a national retrofit strategy, then where better to start than with over 250,000 long-term empty homes? Well, that's just in England. So,
great.
Yeah, that's
Thanks
basically
so
the argument. We would encourage you to look at the website and to take local action and to be involved in the wider campaign as we move forward.
Yeah, so the link's in the chat, so please have a look at that. So I just want to thank all our speakers for this evening. It's been really fantastic, and thanks also to everyone for attending and having such a productive discussion tonight. So we'll say goodbye now. I'm going to stop recording, but for those people who would like to stay on, we're going to keep the channel open and stay here as Radical Housing Network to host people talking about organising or any actions or next steps that people want to take. So you're very welcome to continue the discussion here. So thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks, Claudia. Is the recording finished? So
thanks, everybody.
Claudia,